Welcome to the Assembly of Silence Radio Hour.
Okay, so here we are. This is going to be a quick intro. Really, it's going to be a quick one. It's another conversation with Judah. And it picks up kind of where we left off from the last conversation with Judah. And that's all I'm going to say about it. You know what to expect if you've heard it before. If this is the first time, I don't know, maybe you should listen to another one first. So the obligatory stuff, I don't know why it's obligatory. It doesn't seem to do any good, but I'm going to tell you anyway that if you'd like to support this effort, and it is an effort, it does take time, it takes energy, and it takes a little bit of money too. They don't let you put podcasts up on iTunes for free. At least I don't think they do. So, you can support us by going to patreon.com/TaijiReality. Or there's cryptocurrency stuff in the show description and PayPal and all that. And I guess that's going to be it. Enjoy the show. Okay. It's been decided. Judah's back again. And last time we talked about fear.
And anger.
Oh, that's right. No, that's what I meant to say. Anger.
Yes, anger.
Yeah, we barely mentioned fear.
No, we didn't.
But now we're going to wrap it up. Fear and death.
Death.
Yeah. Nothing to be angry about.
No.
But certainly something...
But unless you aren't comfortable with it.
I guess that would probably be the case with many. I wonder how many people are experiencing anger at the moment of their death. I think fear is more likely the response.
I would imagine.
Yep.
Like you said a moment ago before we started recording, it's the great unknown, right?
Yeah, we have no clue. There's an awful lot of stories, you know, so we have a very elaborate sense of what awaits us, but who can say? I mean, there are those who have died and come back, and there's a certain degree of correspondence between a lot of those stories.
There seems to be a lot of correlation.
Yep.
I have the benefit of an ex-partner of mine, parents being near-death experience researchers.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
You know?
Interesting, right.
And they only deal with what are called veritable experiences, verifiable experiences where the person, it's verified that they died, they talked with the physician, there's, things that their experience was verified, like if the person said they saw this person come into the room as they were dying and this is what they were wearing and so on and so forth, and have been able to verify the full experience. That's what they deal with. And
those would be like post-moment of death as far as the doctors were concerned, right? So
yes.
They would continue to have experience after they had been declared dead.
Exactly. And time and time again, people have a shared experience.
Mm-hmm. And it seems that one of the primary aspects of that is the overall sense that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? That it's like, this is... We're fine, right? This is fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
If not good, right? Warmth, light. Yep.
Beings.
So the sense of presence of others and not just the ones that they're seeing in the room who think that they're dead.
Exactly. Whether it be family members.
They're with others.
Or, it might be family members who've crossed the threshold and passed on, or some other radiant kind of bright being, but it's the stories are rife with this shared experience.
So on a very ultimate level, we're getting messages from this group of people that say that there's nothing to be afraid of, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps we could reasonably extend that to say, well, there's nothing to be angry about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we are in a world that is just consumed with fear and anger.
Yeah.
And as you were saying a moment ago before we started recording, that, our culture is kind of predicated upon the denial of death, that we push that away at all costs, and yet at the same time, it's something that is
just haunting us all the time, you know?
Our media is obsessed with it.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, look at the amount of violence and death and in the movies and TV shows and things like that, right? And yet we will do everything we possibly can.
But it's also framed in this terrible, tragic way. Pretty much 99% of the time, you know, every death is a dramatic and intense tragedy, if not an outrage, right? Whereas, you know, you have like, I know in like New Orleans, like the way of celebrating a death is for everyone to have a party, right?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And there is that kind of aspect of like celebrating the, you know, someone's life, right? But there's also the kind of, you know, boy, you know, they don't have to suffer anymore. Like, you know, send them on their way and, you know, just we soldier on. And then when we go, it's time for celebration, and someone no longer has to suffer anymore. And that's good news, you know? But it's difficult to really like completely feel like that's an acceptable way of viewing it in this culture, right?
It really is. And, you know, when you said there's a lot of anger around death, you know, like if someone's faced with their mortality, say they're given a terminal diagnosis or something like that, right? And there's a lot of anger around death. It makes me wonder with our culture if it's not because we have been programmed to live lives that are inauthentic and not what we really wanted to do with our lives, and so we're just full of regret of like I've been robbed of life. You know, I was sold a false bill of goods. I was told I had to, you know, go to college, get the job, you know, fill in the blanks.
Right.
And
so living was always forestalled for some other time in the imagined future.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And so, then as you get closer and closer to death, you feel more and more that you've been ripped off.
Yeah. And because everything you've been living is a lie. And so it makes sense that you'd be pretty pissed off.
Well, you know, it seems that to some extent maybe that's unavoidable in a densely populated social species, because the way that our society functions is that we have people doing very specialized tasks which limit the range of their experience, but they have to become very expert in order to get it done like efficiently, right? And once you're trained, it's like there's a fair amount of resource that's gone into getting you up to speed, and so people they're kind of locked in a variety of ways because it takes so much energy on the part of both an employer and of the employee themselves to retool to do something else. So you get locked into these situations that, you know, because of just general considerations of life, cost, expense, time, energy, and what have you. It becomes prohibitive, particularly when there's pressures going on in a society, to move to something else. And there you are, you know, it's just built into the fabric of a large technocratic society that this is the way life would go.
So I think about, you were talking about systems in the last episode, and you know, we are currently in a system that's dying. We have a system that is dying.
Appears to be, yeah.
Right. This would be the as we are entering the technological revolution, right? And we're seeing the automation of jobs, right, and fewer and fewer people are needed for these positions. So it's like here's another death.
The Andrew Yang talking points.
Yes, Andrew Yang's talking points, and you know,
one of many very interesting ideas that guy has. I find him to be one of the more appealing. I'm not going to turn this into a political conversation, but I do. We always got the Assembly Silence moment handy in the back pocket. We know how to save this now. If we get out of it in the last episode, we're going to be good here. I think that, you know, there are some really interesting ideas out there, and so we just kind of made the diagnosis that, you know, this is a dying civilization. So let's just say that it's very ill, you know, because let's hold out some hope that maybe things could be, there are some patients who recover from what seems to be, it's almost like the people who are declared dead and who end up coming back and be like, well, I'm not dead yet,
Right.
there's that potential in everything. So let's not completely call it done yet.
Well, here's the thing, is that life shows us one thing, and that is that death and withering and growth and flourishing are always happening in simultaneity.
Yeah, they're inseparable. It's Shiva, right?
Yeah.
You can't get creation without destruction.
Exactly.
So things need to fall apart in order for something to come back together. Yep, without a doubt.
Right.
But now, is it whether that's like a renewal of the various organs of society or the whole frickin' enchilada? That's kind of the question in a certain sense. It was just occurred to me, it might be interesting to try to figure out, like, of the various parts of society, how would we correlate that to the organ systems within a body? Like,
wow.
You kind of think of like, well, I don't know if it's a good way to break it down, but like you have the economy, you have the politics, you have the technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess military in some ways is also another aspect. We need one more, and then we've got we got five. Then we can see if we can figure out how to
Spiritual
correspond.
life.
Yeah, I guess that really is like a huge, now I don't know if there's another one that would come to mind, but it seems like that's an interesting group to try to correspond.
Well, Rudolf Steiner talks about what he called the threefold social order, where he looked at it as there was the economic life, the political life, and spiritual educational life. But within those realms, a lot of other things fall, right? But I think looking more at the renewal of the social organism for where we're at today, because we absolutely have to. We're about to hit the wall. And,
it seems,
and we're running full steam ahead at it, and
right.
And so we need the birth of a new way of doing things.
But we're also we're in a condition where we can't agree on anything. So it's basically like the organism has a mind that's confused, which I think that's what's symbolized by Babylon, right? So Babylon is the confusion of tongues. It's the confusion of consciousness where within a nation, no one understands each other anymore. And we don't even have like a leadership that seems to have any kind of an agreement on anything. So it's a runaway train.
Yeah,
that doesn't bode well for the health of the organism.
We're in a time where everyone's telling you what you see is actually not what you see.
Right. Yes.
Right, that you're not actually seeing that.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, that is to some extent a byproduct of the scientific age, where we became increasingly convinced of the distance between observation and actuality. So we did, in many cases, misperceive what was going on, and we kind of learned that was something that was happening. So we tried to develop a variety of techniques to verify our theories about what was going on. But in the course of doing that, it seems like we really separated the sense of our capacity to observe what's going on and the thing itself. And we're now in this weird zone where nothing seems to have any tangible referent. Even within quantum mechanics, the much beloved bongo-playing particle physicist Richard Feynman says, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, that means you don't, right? And that it's been acknowledged that
it's kind of a good saying for life.
Well, there's something really to it, but it's also acknowledged that the thing that they have constructed doesn't necessarily refer to any particular mechanism. So, and there's some incredible efforts now being made to try to make it mean something, and some of that has to do with this like multi-worlds interpretation where every possible universe exists in parallel, and at any given moment the quantum state of things like will branch so that one particular reality will happen, and then you have all of these other potential realities that are happening in some alternate universe, which is like probably one of the most insane things I've ever heard, but it's actually considered to be a reasonable theory.
So one possibility is that when you die, you're actually being born.
Well, okay, so that's actually a very generous interpretation of it. I think that, that doesn't necessarily branch, right? Maybe it does. I don't know. This is too confusing. I can't talk about it. Because, you can have a branching of something that suggests parallel processes, so that parallel universe thing, right? But then you could also you can imagine a universe where it's just one universe, right? And every death is another birth, right? So really all we're doing is talking about shit we don't know anything about. As usual.
That's what I was going to say. Par for the course.
But that is totally what happens when you start talking about death. Because what can we say about it except that there have been some people who have come back who have said that everything's okay, there's a beautiful white light, and you can hear what's going on, there's beings around with you, and that's all good news, right? I mean, is there anyone who's come back who's talked about the flames of hell?
In all of my conversations with these researchers, never once did they ever encounter that.
So that's good news, everyone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And even if you're a complete scumbag, right?
Yeah.
I'm not to judge anyone, but let's just say that a complete scumbag is something that's possible, right? Absolutely like the worst possible human being. Even they potentially would go to a relatively decent place.
Atheists,
right?
Atheists come back with this profound experience. They have documented a gentleman in Hungary who was an atheist.
Is that past tense?
Past tense.
Okay, so not an atheist anymore?
Not anymore.
That's interesting, right?
Not after his near-death experience. Right. Another really fascinating one.
So all are children of God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's actually started a whole organization now in Hungary, which is an atheist government right now. Right.
Very secular society.
Yes.
Right?
And so, and he's catching a lot of flack for that. There's a really interesting story where a woman died who had cancer and came back, cancer gone. Fully documented.
Really?
I mean, it's like, how do you explain that? But it's 100% documented.
Cancer is an energy?
Cancer is an energy. Yeah.
Well, and maybe cancer is separation from God.
It's parasitic.
So it thinks of itself as being separate from the rest of the body.
Well, it goes against all the natural laws, right? The cells just keep dividing and dividing and dividing without stopping.
And I understand that it actually is a reversion to a more primitive form of cell where the mitochondria is used for energy production. So it's like a fermentation process as opposed to the ATP cycle. Now, I can't remember where I heard that, but it's a really interesting theory, and it kind of makes sense. Like in a collective, if you have one that's really not abiding by that mode of energy production anymore, then it can completely interrupt the entire process, right? It's sort of like it goes back to its own selfish way of deriving energy.
Right.
And as a consequence, if the person reconnect to a sense of their connection with everything, like through a experience with the divine, like post-death, right? Realizing the interconnection of all things, that they're part of this gigantic creation, right? And so they're now part of the body of God. And so then within them, that would be reflected in what happens within this cancerous cell.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because my overall sense is that everything works really well when you have a sense of the consciousness of the thing that you're inside of. And you have the respect for what it is that you're like in a living universe, and that is something which is conscious in the same, and we're on a living planet, and that also has a form of consciousness not so different from our own. Then you have respect for all of the things around you because they're all conscious too. And that just seems like the most basic rule for a harmonious existence, And it seems like illness would be the natural consequence of not seeing it that way. of feeling like you're separated, isolated, and that the things around you are either malevolent or inert.
Right. Right.
Have
no meaning. Mm-hmm. Right.
Or have no life agency, have no spark of divinity.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. No awareness, no consciousness, no. Yeah. Everything is just random. It's just kind of here, and which if you when I think about the scientific creation story of the Big Bang, I can't think of anything that is more depressing and lacking meaning and purpose in the cosmos than that. That life came out of some primordial soup, and it just coincidentally, like a single cellular organism just happened to come into existence, and then became two cells, and so on and so forth. And now all of a sudden, just kind of all by random accident, here we are as human beings. Like the pure lack of meaning in that. Well, no wonder we have so many people just feeling lost, like disconnected.
Right. And our cosmology is basically like, just give us one free miracle and we'll explain everything. I can't remember who I heard say that, but
that's good.
It's a pretty good way of summarizing it, It's like, we don't believe in miracles except for the beginning of everything.
Yeah, exactly. But otherwise they don't exist.
That's right.
Right. And if you try to put meaning in any of this, you're crazy.
And meantime, they're having a real hard time getting a fix on some of the basics when it comes to the age of the universe, which is part of what the whole Big Bang theory is built upon. So, I think there's a increasingly problematic discrepancy between the way that they interpret the cosmic microwave background radiation, and there's another technique that kind of uses the brightness of what they consider to be similar objects in order to get a sense of the size and age of the universe. And those two techniques, I think, are becoming ever more clear. There's a major discrepancy going on. So it seems like some of the foundation of some of those ideas is itself starting to fall apart a bit. And, it seems like in cosmology there's a lot of problems like that, where there are a lot of observed phenomena that don't fit into the current model.
Yeah. This is where I have a lot of respect for the Hindu concept of time. Where somehow they've managed to trace it back billions and billions and billions of years, and they look at it through divine beings' existence. From their perspective, they would say that the Big Bang that we discussed, the birth of our universe, was actually just one of many times that Brahma opened his eyes.
Right. Yep. So it would be the what is that called? Yuga, right? It's a yuga cycle.
Well, yeah, but even more than that, the yugas are actually much shorter spans of time.
Oh, the yugas are within.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, I can't get in. I wish I had this great book on it at my house, but yeah, just Brahma opens his eyes, bang, boom, universe creation happens, and then there's billions of years that are unfolding, and within that there's other cycles that are happening, and
Does it say what Brahma sees when he first opens his eyes? You gotta wonder, what in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
There ain't nothing.
Nothing.
And then Brahma opens his eyes. So
that's the Big Bang.
It almost feels like when Brahma opens his eyes, that's the first radiation of light. Like light goes out of the eyes. And I remember seeing there's actually an interesting experiment that was done that shows that all living creatures produce photons, and they produce photons more around the area of the eyes.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
So, yeah, it's interesting. There must be, if we're talking about, Brahma's like the sleeping consciousness at the core of being, right? A dreamer, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's the imagination occurring within that dream. So is that what Brahma sees when he opens his eyes? The dream within his own mind?
Once again, the mind of God unfolding.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know.
I have no clue.
I mean, that's the interesting thing about those traditions, too, is that it's so specific and drawn in such detail, you know?
And they have the years down, like, it's so many millions of years for this, and then this is so many billions of years, and this happens more than just once. I mean,
I wonder what all of that numerology is built on. I mean, maybe it's mathematics. I don't know if I should call it numerology or mathematics, but what is the seed idea that produces these numbers, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing is that we do, you know, it's undeniable that we embody the entire cosmos, I think. I mean, maybe not from it. Okay, so let me rephrase that. Because a scientific individual will be like, "Oh, that's absurd." I mean, but we are the cosmos embodied.
I think that there's a kind of a holographic quality to phenomena.
Yes.
And so you can say that, you know, in the image of, right? Of course, the resolution of a hologram is greatly changed by its size. Yeah. So we're a very poor resolution version. I mean, we are tiny, tiny, tiny. We're so tiny, we're on this tiny little planet.
We're a speck of dust.
Yeah, and this little planet is tiny compared to just our sun, you know? And then, so in the vastness of the cosmos, we are, you know, extraordinarily small, holographic. What's the right word for a copy of a hologram? There's got to be a word for that. But we're like copies. We're like very low resolution copies of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You know, every node of consciousness. I mean, the same for a flea, I imagine, on some level. You know, but I do think that humans do occupy a particularly unique role here on this planet, without a doubt.
Yeah, well, this is the great esoteric dilemma that we are so small and insignificant, yet so great and significant, right? And we vacillate, and there's a chasm between those two that we actually are like vacillating between.
Well, we're both. Yeah. And so, you know, there's a certain connection between the greatness and the smallness.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things I wonder about the mind of God is, in a certain level, it feels like that is the concentration that holds every atom of the universe together. And there's a really interesting little tidbit of quasi-scientific information that seems to suggest that's true. This guy is considered to be kind of a nut in the scientific world, but if it's true what he says, his name is Nassim Haramein.
Oh yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah, so he has this thing about that at the core of every single proton in the universe is the energy potential of the entire universe, which is, I know, an issue within mainstream physics, because there's this something called, like, I can't remember exactly what it's called, something like the proton catastrophe. Like, they have a problem where as you approach, the energy level goes to infinity, something along those lines. And they do all this elaborate quantization to try to avoid that problem, right? But that suggests a kind of a unified point throughout all space, like basically a interface between the non-physical and the physical at the core of every single unit of being, you know, which is awesome. And so you can imagine, like, that even God stands, you know, that well, let's, for the sake of this conversation, say Brahma. So Brahma is dreaming this whole thing, and that within that consciousness is the concentration that produces the thing that holds every single element of the imagination together, of the imagined being, right? So there's your, like, both the grandest thing within which everything is occurring is also at the center of the smallest thing, right? And so in the same way, like, humanity is this great and small thing in our own little scale, you know?
Right.
There's, and that fundamental opposition, which has a meeting point, seems to be part of the grand design, right? So one of the things that's problematic perhaps within the sciences is the idea that opposition ends up at the end of the pole, right? So that you have, like, you know, your good or evil that are like way, way, way away from each other, right? But this suggests that these two things are actually meeting. The meeting point is the greatest opposition, and the extension is something which kind of diffuses as it goes out.
Right. That would make a lot of sense, right?
Seems to be.
Yeah. I think, what this I will steer this away, but I will come back.
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay.
Yes. I got my finger on that.
That's about what's going to happen here.
What was that?
Well, when you say that, what that makes me think of is the far right and the far left.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, they are married to each other. They're right next to each other.
They're
like
so far apart from each other. They're right next to each other, and that's
they
where
can't see that they're actually lying in bed together,
exactly
doing it to each other.
And that's where the greatest friction is.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So it's fascinating. The farther to the left or the farther to the right we go, the closer we get to the other pole.
Too much extreme causes some serious problems.
Yeah.
It's one thing if it's contained within a common consciousness and it's able to negotiate those extremes. It's an entirely different thing if there's no recognition of the commonality. And that, unfortunately, is where we are. Even though the cognitive dissonance happening on both sides couldn't make it more clear that there is a common framework within which both are really reacting, let's say. It's unfortunate that, how do you get something to realize that the thing that it hates the most, we're getting back to, anger and fear, I think, too. There's an incredible amount of fear about what the consequences are of the opposite side victory, right?
Yeah.
So the left and the right are both terrified that the other side are going to gain control of this thing. Meanwhile, they're fighting over the steering wheel, and the thing is, like, continuing to hurtle in the same frickin' direction down the drain.
Yeah.
So how do you get a consciousness to start to recognize that thing that it fears the most is the very thing it needs to incorporate into its understanding? That's where we really are, right? And I have no idea how to get that message across. It just seems like when you're dealing with someone who's really committed to one of those ideologies, the instant you start to suggest that the other side might be worth listening to, it's like conversation is over.
Done. There's no capacity to entertain it. Shut it down.
It's so tragic. It really is. It just seems like, and there's a lot of intelligent people who seem to be really locked into that as well. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either.
We can only speculate on what that really indicates. But certainly when it comes to an enterprise as large as a nation, where there's so many different types of people, so many different interests need to be taken into account, and everyone is really, we are in this together, whether people like it or not.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Civil War is not going to be pretty, folks. It's like we went through one of them, and it's hard to imagine what would happen here if we can't find some way of bridging this divide.
Yeah, I mean, we are in this together.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Interesting times.
No doubt.
What's that Chinese?
The Chinese curse, yeah.
Chinese curse, may
you live in interesting times.
Yeah, may you live in interesting times.
That's what I've heard. But I've also heard, that there's that they would say, well, in China, the same ideogram for danger is for opportunity. But then I heard later on that wasn't true. So, so you got to be careful about all that kind of.
Yeah. We have no idea. Yeah.
I mean, I guess danger is an opportunity for someone.
Yeah. I tend to avoid danger.
Yeah, I try to avoid it too.
Yeah. That's one I'm not comfortable with.
But, from the point of view of some people, just living outside the city is dangerous,
Yeah.
Or living in an area where people like to shoot guns is dangerous.
Right.
Or
getting in a car and driving.
That is probably the most dangerous of all of those things, without a doubt.
Absolutely. And we do it all the time without even thinking about it, right? And yet it's probably one of the most dangerous things we can do.
It's up there at the top.
Yep. I have an irrational fear of sharks.
You do?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
And yet I surf, right? So
That's funny. I actually experienced being in the water with a shark once.
Really?
And it was kind of intense. You know, we were in Thailand and we were swimming in an area where they said there sometimes were sharks. And we had seen some small ones that didn't seem to be that weren't worth worrying about. But we did see one big one, and it was kind of distant. It wasn't that close, but it really was like, just like everything in you was like, bing, holy fuck, where's the nearest place to go that's not here, And we got out of the water pretty quickly, it didn't seem interested. So
were you like swimming off of a boat, or were you? Did you have
we
to
were
swim to shore kind of thing.
Yeah, I think we swam to an outcropping of rocks that wasn't too far away. But yeah, it's like we jump into lakes and rivers and all this kind of stuff, without really thinking about it too much around here. Like I'm aware that there are some snakes and that sort of thing, but pretty much. Like now, I wondered, like back in the hunter-gatherer days. Right? There probably was way more awareness of all the various potential hazards because they hadn't been flushed out of everything yet, And maybe every time you approached a lake for the first time, you would spend the first few hours like testing with sticks all around and really checking out the water and getting rid of the snakes if you found them, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's another way I think in which we've kind of gotten complacent about what the relationship to the natural world is.
One of the things that stimulates for me, or a thought that it stimulates for me, is back then, death could happen fast, like you said, right? Death could happen fast. It can come from any number of things. You had to be hyper aware. You think of like a deer that goes out into the open, or a rabbit. They're constantly kind of looking around, right? Mm-hmm. And they're hyper alert, right?
Right.
So we were probably much more alert of our surroundings. We don't have to be so alert anymore, and death is a slow, drawn-out process for the most part anymore. So it seems like there would be a greater, maybe potential fear around it.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people interpret that vigilance in rabbits and deer as stress.
Right.
But I don't think that that's how it's experienced. If it's true that the hunter-gatherers were way less stressed out than we are, maybe we're kind of like projecting that stress response.
Right.
But I don't know. Deer do seem to be kind of stressed out every now and then. I don't know if that's just because they're living in our environments now. It seems like that does really make a difference.
Yeah, and they are prey.
Yeah. And like not just the, their traditional natural predators, but, rifles.
Right.
So, and maybe we're just not as good of a shot as... Okay. So, we got interrupted.
We did.
Yeah.
We had a technological glitch,
Yep.
you could say.
It's the first time this has happened. Ran out of space on the card.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So we took a break, we ate some cheese, and now we're back.
Yes. Bread and cheese. Food that guys eat.
That's right. Yeah. Food that guys eat. With very little fanfare. Actually, there wasn't even a plate involved.
No plate. No need for
toasting
or even presentation.
No presentation.
No presentation whatsoever.
Yeah, there were blocks of cheese that women would have turned their noses up at. Just because of the shape, just because of the way they were cut.
Well, they were off.
Cut.
It was rough
hewn cheese. I guess that's offensive to those who would be offended by it.
It would be.
Yeah.
To those who would be offended by it.
Yep. On a number of different levels.
Yeah.
But we can move on from that and attempt to return to what we're talking about. We get to talk about something entirely different.
I mean, we can move from sexism to speciesism. Because we were doing speciesism. We were talking about how rabbits and deer are naturally nervous or anxious, right?
Yeah. And we were wondering, like, whether or not that's a level of stress that could be compared to stress, like the stress that we're under. And we were saying basically probably not, there's something like natural stress that's different from the kind of stress that we're experiencing. Now, what is that difference? I mean, it does seem that if your nervous system is going to be thinking about whether or not you're about to be attacked at any given moment, one would imagine that's a pretty high level of stress, right? And so why would the hunter-gatherers not feel that way? And you would really have to be in an area where you were convinced there were no main predators around, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be possible
I think that would be literally impossible.
Yeah. It wasn't until we really had eliminated them from certain areas that we could breathe easy for a while. So that would be, I guess, be the case that was made to say that, life was brutal and short and fearful, right?
Right.
And the case that this guy we were talking about before, whose name I would have to look up again, Ryan, I believe is the last name, he's saying that's not the case, that actually we were pretty chill most of the time, and if there was an event, it was short and quick and merciful, and that life was, in general, far less stressful, right? So now what about rabbits and deer? You got to wonder, I think what we were saying after the thing had shut itself off was something along the lines of, well, maybe cougars are way better hunters than we are. And so once a deer or a rabbit was within the grasp of that predator, they would have a way higher kill rate than we would. And so maybe the nervousness now is because they're aware that actually this could not go quickly. This could be a real botch job because this guy has not been sufficiently mastering the art of riflery before getting out there and taking a shot.
Right.
So that would be an explanation that requires a fair amount of consciousness, I guess you could say, to attribute that to rabbits and deers, but I don't see why not. It seems to me that they're clearly aware of their circumstance, and those types of details would be the utmost importance to them, right?
Yeah, I would think they have they've had quite some time to learn.
Although at the same time, they have not figured out how to not stand in the roadway when the lights are coming fast and furiously at them. So it begs the question, whether or not they really would learn about these things. But I think it is pretty clear that, for instance, the bears really understand what a rifle is. Some of those larger animals they won't go near us because they know that we've got these devices that will completely fuck them up. So I'm pretty sure that consciousness other than human beings is capable of understanding this. It's just a question of whether or not the deer and the rabbits would get it.
Right.
So that's a whole bunch of confusion.
Like you're saying that deer and rabbits aren't very conscious.
No, I'm not saying that.
Are you slandering deer and rabbits?
I am a speciesist, I guess. All of these arguments are species.
Yeah.
Specious. Specious arguments.
Specious arguments. Oh.
Yeah, it's all speculative. Death is not the only thing we don't know about. We really don't know what any other species is actually thinking, what their experience of existence is. We don't know. We don't even know what each other are thinking.
I was just going to say that. We don't even know what we ourselves are thinking half the time.
It's true.
What were you thinking? I don't know.
I think more than half the time, whatever I'm saying, it's like I didn't even think it yet.
It just comes out.
Yeah, it's pretty much like, I don't know. I don't know. I almost feel like it's just a thing that I can kind of ride like a wave, And so there's like a form to it, and I can put words to the form, but I don't really know what the hell it is while I'm doing it. I don't know where the thought goes.
Or where it comes
That's
from.
actually what's really a little frightening about it sometimes,
Yeah.
Because sometimes thoughts end up going somewhere you just don't want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, thinking is an art.
It's also like, there's this great line in Captain Beefheart's song that says, "Someone's had too much to think." And I think, it's a somewhat compulsive act, I guess you could say, somewhat, maybe it comes from nervousness to a large extent.
Yeah.
I have a song that's called Intelligence, and the line is, "Intelligence is a nervous disorder."
I like that. But, here's the thing is that, when I look out, there's not a whole lot of people willing their thinking. I mean, there's
a place for it.
Right. Most people are just on autopilot. They're regurgitating information. They're in looping thought patterns. Very few people are actually inspecting what they're thinking, what they're about to say, taking the reins of their thought life.
But strictly speaking, we really don't know if that's the case. It may be that a lot of people are thinking a lot more than we would think. It's just that they're smart enough not to say anything.
No, that's true. I mean, those who know don't say, and those who say don't know.
Exactly. So, you could say they're smart enough to, or too cowardly to,
Right.
So it's
Right.
some mixture, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, it does seem like, well, life is short and some things have to be said. Otherwise, there is no expression into the universe which would stimulate a change. So if we're in a circumstance that appears to be going to a very negative place, it's really just kind of as basic as going, hey, look at where we're going. You think maybe we could find a different destination than the one we seem to be heading towards? That seems to be like worth the risk of bringing it up in general. And on some fundamental cultural level, I feel like that's what we're doing here. We're saying, okay, people have picked up that thing that was given to them, and they're taking it to the bank with them now. And we're like, wait a second, before you pick that thing up, let's turn it over a few times. That's basically it, It seems like a worthwhile conversation. And, okay, there are risks inherent in every expression, so here we go. That's what the assembly silence, that's the risk we're taking. That's the danger we're willing to confront.
Yeah. I think that's a good moment.
Yeah, okay. Here we go. I think that was inspired by the cats.
Yeah. That was good.
I have no idea how long we had been recording when we got cut off last time.
I think a little over 30-some minutes.
All right.
Yeah.
So 40-something minutes?
I think we're good.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
You actually have nothing else to say? Really?
There's always more to say.
That's true.
But you know what?
I think we're done.
I'm not going to say.
Excellent. That's because you know. Exactly.
Thanks for listening. We look forward to serving you again soon. In the meantime, remember, turn that thing over a few times before you pick it up and take it home.